Everyone turned away from the girl in a wheelchair at the billionaire's wedding until a single father stepped onto the dance floor. What happened next changed everything. Subscribe and write in the comments. Would you have approached her? The Everly estate had never looked more splendid. Ivory tents billowed like sails in the warm Virginia breeze, anchored by golden poles wrapped in cascading orchids. Crystal chandeliers hung from the inner linings, casting thousands of soft, refracted lights over silk-covered tables adorned with imported china and glass. The air was heavy with the mingled aromas of jasmine, gardenia, and expensive perfume. Classical strings whispered through the space, their music elegant and unintrusive. This was not just a wedding, it was an exhibition of legacy, a performance of wealth so refined it bordered on myth. And in the middle of it all, invisible to nearly everyone, sat a girl in a wheelchair. Annabelle Prescott, 13, perched at the edge of the great reception hall beneath the main tent. Her chair sleek, black, almost clinical looked like it belonged more in a hospital corridor than among marble floors and champagne flutes. She wore an emerald green dress chosen by her aunt, the bride, tailored perfectly, yet clearly not with love. The dress shimmered under the chandeliers, its color deep and regal, but its beauty couldn't hide the discomfort in the girl's posture. Her shoulders curled inward slightly, her back never quite touching the chair. Her hands rested in her lap, fidgeting with the satin fabric, folding and unfolding it in a slow, silent rhythm. No one spoke to her. Not the children her age who dashed around in polished shoes and laughter, nor the adults who sipped cocktails and talked politics with hollow smiles. The few glances thrown her way were either fleeting or loaded with that particular brand of adult discomfort, the kind that made people feel compelled to look away rather than acknowledge what made them uneasy. She wasn't just a girl in a wheelchair. She was a disruption, a reminder, and reminders had no place at the Everly wedding. Annabelle watched the dancers from her quiet corner. She used to dance herself before the accident, before her parents' car flipped 3 times on a rain-slick road, before everything that felt stable in her life shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. Her mother had always loved dancing. In the living room, the two of them would twirl to old Ella Fitzgerald records, while her father watched and clapped along. Those moments had been her world, and now the music only hurt. The bridal party passed close by, their laughter sharp and champagne-flavored. Her Aunt Newly Mrs. Clarissa Everly Lawrence looked radiant, every hair in place, her gown a cascade of hand-stitched lace that seemed spun from moonlight itself. Clarissa had barely acknowledged Annabelle since the ceremony. A quick air kiss and a wave toward the corner had served as instructions. Sit, look pleasant, don't speak unless spoken to. The cake had been cut, the toast delivered with practiced sincerity. The orchestra played a soft Strauss waltz, while couples glided over the polished dance floor. And Annabelle sat alone. The chair squeaked faintly when she tried to shift her weight. She reached toward the dessert table where petit four and rose-shaped tarts beckoned from silver trays. Her fingers stretched, strained, until a server passed her by, eyes averted, and the tray kept moving. She managed to grasp a miniature eclair at the last second, nearly dropping it. No one noticed. Or if they did, they chose not to react. From a distance, Jordan Hale watched. Dressed in the crisp black uniform of the event staff, Jordan moved with the quiet efficiency of someone used to going unnoticed. He oversaw operations today, power lines, food coordination, emergencies. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. He liked that. Honest work kept his mind occupied. But there were moments, just like this, when the uniform didn't hide what lay beneath. The ex-Marine, the widower, the father of a daughter who would have been Annabelle's age. He saw the girl in the corner long before anyone else. He saw the stiffness in her neck, the hesitations in her hands. He saw the quiet panic behind her eyes, that soft flickering of will before it extinguished into apathy. He had seen that look before, in VA hospitals and mirrors, in his own daughter's face before the treatment stopped working. Jordan didn't belong here, not really. This wedding was the domain of generational money, polished etiquette, and ancient expectations. He was here to keep things running, to make sure no one noticed the machinery behind the performance. But now he couldn't look away. He adjusted his earpiece, trying to tune out the buzz of staff chatter. Somewhere behind the main tent, someone was trying to light candles with a broken lighter. Another call came through about the valet rotation. He ignored both. His eyes remained fixed on the girl. She was dressed like a doll, seated like a burden. He knew that weight, knew it intimately. And though every inch of training, discipline, and logic told him to stay where he was, to keep boundaries firm and his presence minimal, something inside him stirred. For a moment he wavered. Memories flooded him. His daughter on her last birthday, too weak to stand, but still insisting they dance. The way she had laughed despite the pain. The promise he had made to her, silently after the funeral, to never let another child feel that kind of isolation in a room full of people. He stepped forward. It was a small movement, barely more than a shift in posture, but it sent ripples across his body like aftershocks. His breath tightened, his muscles tense beneath the neatly pressed uniform. Still, he moved again, slow and steady, toward the far side of the hall where Annabelle sat. She didn't see him at first. Her gaze remained locked on the dancers. Then she noticed the change in sound, the subtle quiet of footsteps, softer than the waltz, and turned her head. Their eyes met. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His expression said more than words could carry. It was a question, not a command. An offering, not a duty. And somewhere behind the uncertainty in her face, a spark lit. She looked down at her hands, hesitated. Then slowly she nodded. He moved closer, silently asking her permission at each step. He extended a hand, not to pull her, not to push, simply to invite. Annabelle looked at it for a long time, then placed her trembling fingers in his palm. The chair clicked as its brakes were released. The two of them began to move. They didn't head toward the center of the ballroom, where the elite performed their curated joy. Instead, Jordan guided her to a small space near the edge of the tent, where the grass met polished stone, just under the halo of a hanging light. The music drifted toward them. Still Strauss, still soft, and Jordan took his place in front of her. He adjusted her posture gently, never forcing, never rushing. Then with practiced ease, he slipped one arm around her back, the other supporting her weight from the side, and she stood. Not fully, not firmly, but enough. Her arms clutched at his shoulders, her legs trembling like reeds in wind, and he held her with the strength of a man who had spent his whole life holding others up. They moved, slowly, carefully. A half step, a shift, a pause, then another. Jordan matched her rhythm to the music, not leading but accompanying. His body became an extension of her will, his strength a scaffold for her courage. It wasn't a dance in the traditional sense. It was something quieter, more sacred. People began to notice. The murmurs came in waves, soft and confused at first. A few glances, then gasps, then the hush of a collective breath held. Phones lifted. Someone whispered a name. Others simply watched, transfixed. But for Annabelle, there was only the music and the man holding her upright. She closed her eyes. The sounds faded. The world contracted to the pressure of his hand, the warmth of his breath, the certainty in his stance. And then she smiled. Not the polite, practiced curl of lips adults often demanded, but a real smile. Open, bright, unafraid. It broke something open in Jordan. Not pain, not memory, but something that might have been peace. They danced, and in that moment, for the first time in years, both of them were no longer alone. At first, the sound of the music masked their movement, a waltz so soft it could have been a breeze moving through silk. But slowly, inevitably, the silence around them thickened, and the murmurs began. Not loud, not yet, but enough to ripple across the sea of polished shoes and champagne glasses. Heads turned, conversations trailed off mid-sentence. Forks froze above plates of rosemary chicken and glazed carrots. There was something happening, something outside the script of this meticulously planned evening, and it wasn't going unnoticed. Jordan didn't flinch. He kept his gaze on Annabelle's face, watching every flicker of doubt, every small flickering effort as she struggled to hold her own weight. She was trembling. Her body betrayed her more than she wanted it to, but her hands clung to his shoulders with a quiet ferocity that needed no translation. She was trying. With everything she had, she was trying, and he was there to make sure that effort didn't go unseen. They moved in slow arcs, her legs brushing the ground but never fully bearing her. His strength cradled her like scaffolding under a structure mid-repair. There was no choreography, only instinct. His muscle memory, her determination. A pause here, a shift of balance there. Each motion painstaking and sacred. Whispers began to thicken into voices. Who is he? Isn't that the Prescott girl? She hasn't stood since the accident. More phones emerged, their tiny lenses trained on the scene like eyes that dared not blink. Somewhere near the center of the floor, a photographer crouched instinctively, raising his camera with reverent precision. For a few long moments, the crowd's curiosity was restrained, their decorum holding the reins of their confusion. But confusion has a tipping point, and not everyone responded with wonder. From across the main tent, Clarissa spotted them. The bride stood with her groom near the gift table, her veil pinned high like a crown, her smile already faltering. At first, she didn't recognize what she was seeing, only that people were turning away from her, their attention no longer fixed where it should be. She followed the direction of their gaze and saw it, her niece in the arms of a man Clarissa didn't remember approving for the guest list. An employee, a staffer, holding her niece, dancing with her, in front of everyone. The fury came hot and immediate, like a slap across the face. Clarissa moved quickly, one hand hitching up the delicate lace of her dress. Her heels clicked against the marble tiles, sharp as gunshots. Several guests tried to catch her eye, to warn her with the subtle glances of social self-preservation. But she ignored them. She was already too close to stop. Before she could reach them, however, a different presence rose from his seat. General Everett Everly did not stand often. At 91, his spine had grown crooked, and his knees protested even the smallest motion. But when he did rise, the world around him seemed to shift with it. People noticed, voices quieted, and paths opened. He had been watching for some time now, watching the man, watching his granddaughter, watching the room hold its breath as something profoundly unplanned unfolded before them, and something inside him stirred. Not anger, not indignation, but memory, of wars fought and daughters raised, of nights when silence was not a refuge but a sentence, of the pain of seeing people turn away from what made them uncomfortable. His own hands, gnarled and trembling, gripped the top of his cane as he stepped onto the dance floor. Clarissa froze. The general's pace was deliberate. The room parted for him without a word. When he reached the pair Annabelle swaying lightly in Jordan's arms, he paused, his cane tapping once against the floor like a ceremonial marker. Jordan noticed him then, his back straightening slightly, his instinctive respect for authority still wired deep into his bones. But he didn't let go. His hands held firm, steadying Annabelle with practiced care. The old man's eyes traveled slowly across the scene, then fixed on Jordan's face. For a long moment, they simply looked at one another. The air seemed to thicken, anticipation knotting in the throats of every witness. Then, without a word, General Everly reached out and placed his hand on Jordan's shoulder. He nodded once. Then slowly, solemnly, he bowed. Gasps escaped lips across the room like birds startled into flight. It wasn't theatrical, it wasn't exaggerated, but it was impossible to misinterpret. This was respect. This was blessing. This was the head of the family of the legacy itself, acknowledging what no one else had the courage to. The dam broke. Applause began tentatively, then surged. It spread like fire across the tent, growing louder, freer, faces lit up, eyes filled. And somewhere behind a cluster of floral arrangements, the quartet, who had gone silent in anticipation of disaster, resumed playing a different tune now, slower still, more tender. Not a waltz, a lullaby in 3/4 time. Clarissa stood rooted, her expression frozen in an elegant mask that cracked only at the corners. She turned without another word and disappeared through the folds of the tent, her veil catching for just a moment on the edge of a golden chair before slipping free like a ghost. Jordan continued the dance as long as Annabelle could bear it. Her breathing grew heavier, her body leaning more and more into his support. He didn't mind, not for a second. When she looked up at him again, her cheeks were damp, not from effort, but from something older and deeper. He gave a small nod and guided her gently back toward her wheelchair. He lowered her into it with the same reverence he might have offered a queen. She leaned back, still breathless, but her eyes glowed. She mouthed something. Thank you, perhaps. But Jordan didn't need to hear the words. He saw them. He turned to leave. But he didn't make it more than 2 steps before a voice stopped him. Mr. Hale. The general stood nearby, his hand resting on the head of his cane. His voice was quieter now, rasped by years and weather. Jordan turned and approached. I'll need a moment, the old man said, not as a request, but as a fact. Jordan followed him off the dance floor, toward the edge of the tent where a few wooden chairs stood empty. They sat in silence at first, the music now a far-off hum, the chatter subdued. You were in the service, the general said at last. Not a question. Yes, sir. Which branch? Marines. The general nodded. Explains the posture and the courage. They fell into another moment of silence. I don't believe in accidents, the general continued. You didn't just wander over to that girl tonight. No, sir, Jordan replied. She reminds you of someone. Yes, sir. The old man looked toward Annabelle, who now sat encircled by a small group of curious guest children and adults alike, asking her questions, listening as if she had just been discovered. She was smiling, radiant with something fragile and new. She needed someone, the general said, and you answered. I only did what anyone would have done, Jordan said. The general gave a tired, knowing smile. No, son, you did what almost no one would have done, and I'm not going to forget it. Jordan looked down at his hands, unsure how to respond. The general's next words made it unnecessary. I want you to stay, he said. Not just tonight. I have a place I'd like you to see. A project. We've talked for years about building something for children like Annabelle. Something real. But we never had the right man to lead it. Jordan blinked. I'm just the operations lead. You're a soldier, a father, a man who walks toward pain, not away from it. That's more than most. The conversation drifted into details, but the essence had already been set. A seed planted, a door opened, a future quietly forged under the starlit canopy of a wedding that had, for one brief moment, become something holy. Later, as the crowd thinned and lanterns were extinguished one by one, Jordan stood at the edge of the estate's great lawn, watching the guests depart in black cars and silver limousines. Annabelle passed by, her chair pushed by a young cousin, her hand lifted in a wave that made something tight in his chest relax. He returned the gesture. She was smiling still, and this time, the whole world was watching her. The morning after the wedding dawned with a hush that blanketed the Everly estate like fresh snow. Sunlight spilled over the Virginia hills in soft gold, dappling the porch columns and sprawling gardens with warmth. The great white tent was gone, dismantled in the early hours by a skeleton crew, leaving behind flattened grass, trampled rose petals, and a silence that echoed all the louder for what had happened the night before. In the wake of whispered conversations, scattered news clips, and photos that had already begun to circulate online, a new kind of energy had begun to pulse quietly through the estate. Something had changed. Something had begun. Jordan stood alone on the gravel path just beyond the southern wing of the mansion, facing the long expanse of lawn that sloped down toward a small lake. He was early, too early, but he didn't mind. He hadn't slept much. The images of the night returned to him in waves. Annabelle's trembling smile, the pressure of her hand on his shoulder, the old general's solemn bow. He felt as if he were still moving within the music, as if the dance had never quite ended. He had come expecting consequences. Perhaps dismissal, a reprimand, a quiet warning not to overstep again. Yet instead he had been summoned to the estate itself, not by a supervisor, but by the patriarch. General Everett Everly had sent a formal note, delivered by a uniformed attendant. One line only. Come, we have more to build than tents. The back door opened with a soft click, and Jordan turned. The general didn't emerge. He didn't need to. It was Clarissa who appeared, the bride now stripped of veil and gown, dressed in a slate gray robe, her face bare of makeup, her hair tightly wound into a severe bun. She looked older in daylight, smaller too. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Clarissa looked at him with the cool assessment of someone still deciding if a person was asset or threat. But there was something else beneath it, something fractured. "My uncle wants to see you," she said finally. "He's in the study." Jordan nodded, thanking her with a slight tilt of the head. As he passed, Clarissa reached out and caught his sleeve. "She was different last night," she said, her voice low. "After the dance, she wouldn't stop smiling. I didn't think she could anymore." Jordan waited. "I didn't know what to say to her when her parents died," Clarissa added after a beat. "I didn't know how to be what she needed, so I put her somewhere quiet, where she wouldn't get hurt." She swallowed. "Maybe that's worse." He didn't respond. He didn't have to. She released him with a small nod and disappeared inside. The study smelled of old books, tobacco, and leather. Everything about it was dark, burnished, and heavy with time. The general sat near the window, backlit by the morning sun, a cup of coffee in his liver-spotted hands, and a thin folder resting on his lap. He didn't stand when Jordan entered. Instead, he gestured to the chair opposite him. "I've spoken with the board," he said without preamble. "My name still means something in this town. And if I say we're building a center, they'll say yes. But I don't want a memorial plaque in a foundation that runs itself into committee obscurity. I want something alive." Jordan leaned forward slightly, listening. "I want a place for children like Annabelle. A real place. Not a school, not a hospital, not a camp. A sanctuary, somewhere they learn to trust their bodies again. And the world." The general's voice cracked slightly on the last word. Jordan looked down at the folder, then back at the man who had once led troops through foreign wars, and now sat fighting something more invisible regret. "You want me to run it?" Jordan asked quietly. "I want you to build it." He left the estate 2 hours later with the folder tucked under his arm and a promise folded inside his chest. It wasn't about prestige. It wasn't even about redemption. It was about purpose, something he had thought he'd buried with his daughter. Something he hadn't expected to find again on a wedding night, in the arms of a girl he barely knew. In the weeks that followed, Jordan and Annabelle saw each other often. At first, she visited the estate to meet with architects and advisors under the general's instruction, but soon those visits took on a life of their own. Jordan would bring diagrams and sketches. She would critique them with the precision of a practiced mind, her fingers tracing the imagined spaces on the blueprints as if she were already moving through them. He learned that she loved art, especially charcoal, that she once dreamed of becoming a dancer before the crash, that she hated being treated like glass, but sometimes needed someone to catch her before she fell. They worked together. They talked. And slowly she changed. Jordan noticed it first in the way she carried herself, less like a shadow, more like a flame. She asked questions now, demanded explanations. She interrupted meetings with corrections. She no longer waited for someone to notice her. She made herself known. Physical therapy became a shared rhythm between them. Jordan adapted techniques he remembered from the military and from his time volunteering in veterans' clinics. He built rails in his garage. He taught her to shift weight through her arms, to plant one foot with purpose before moving the other. Progress came in slow inches, then in sudden leaps. The first time she stood on her own for more than a few seconds, she collapsed into his chest and cried. He didn't say a word. He only held her. The center broke ground in the early spring. It would stand on a 5-acre lot not far from the estate, nestled near the edge of the woods with windows wide enough to catch every angle of the sun. It would have gardens, art rooms, open dance spaces with mirrored walls and gentle floors. A place built not for healing alone, but for joy, for power, for movement. When they laid the cornerstone, Annabelle insisted on helping. She rolled forward with her hair braided back and a hard hat slightly too large for her head. Jordan placed the trowel in her hand, and she pressed it into the cement with shaky determination. Someone from the local press snapped a photo. It would be on the front page the next day under the headline, "A Veteran and a Girl Who Dared to Dance." Months passed, the building rose, the land softened, and one evening, Jordan received a call from Clarissa, inviting him and Annabelle to the estate for a celebration. "It's not a gala," she said. No speeches, no photographers, just, "Come, you should see this." He wasn't sure what to expect, but when he arrived, he found the back lawn strung with soft lights, the ground cleared and smoothed into a wide open space. A quartet played gently in the corner. Dozens of people stood in clusters, talking in low voices, and in the center of it all stood Annabelle. She wore a different dress this time, navy blue, simple, but perfectly fitted to her frame. Her posture was upright. Her braces were visible but unashamed. She was waiting. When Jordan approached, she smiled and extended a hand. He took it. Their dance wasn't grand. It wasn't flawless. But it was theirs. Step by halting step, she moved with him under the starlight, her body swaying with determination. Around them, people paused their conversations, eyes drawn again to the girl who had once sat alone in the corner of a wedding. Now she moved. Now she laughed. Now she danced. Jordan looked up at the sky as the music carried them forward. Somewhere beyond the lights, beyond the distant trees, he imagined his daughter watching, and he smiled. He didn't save Annabelle. She wasn't someone to be saved, but he had seen her. And because he had seen her, the world had shifted just enough to let the light in. And that was enough. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe for more just like it. Don't forget to watch the next video and check out the others on the channel. And if you think someone needs to hear this, share it. You never know who it might touch.